Okay. So, hello, I'm Claire Sudbury. I have met most of you, but not all of you.
Not me.
Hello. I'm a senior developer, stroke tech lead. I have been a software developer for 17 years. I have been with ThoughtWorks for very nearly 6 months. My probation comes up at the end of next week, so if you really, really hate this talk, you've got 1 week to do something about it. That was a joke, but it was a joke based on a very real fear, which is something that I will come on to. And what I'm going to talk about is fear and anxiety, and the way that they can affect us as consultants. And I'm also going to talk about actual serious anxiety attacks and serious problems with anxiety that people can have, which might potentially go a bit beyond just daily work anxiety. But anxiety in its more serious sense, so debilitating anxiety attacks, is something that I have suffered from. And I think that when I recovered from that and got over that, I learned some really useful skills. So I'm going to talk quite a lot about anxiety in the sense that it can, when it seriously affects people. But the talk of the title of this talk is We're Going On About, and that's because when I knew that I wanted to talk about fear, and when I was thinking about fear, something that popped into my head was a children's book called We're Going On a Bear Hunt. It's a children's book. Tom's nodding at the back. Anybody who has children will be aware of it, probably. It was written by Michael Rosen, who is a fantastic man. So he's also a poet, he's also a political activist, great bloke, I recommend you look him up. But he wrote this book. And I'm just going to read out the first 4 lines of the book, and then I'll explain why. So bear with me, sorry, bad pun. We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. What a beautiful day. We're not scared. So that's the line. That's the thing that made me think of We're Going On a Bear Hunt. And you don't believe them. I mean, the book is actually about a family going on a day out and pretending to hunt for bears. They're pretending to chase bears. You know it's not real. You know it's make-believe. So you know that they're probably not really scared. But when they say we're not scared, what they're telling you is actually we are a little bit scared, but we're saying we're not scared, because actually that's a really useful technique. And that's something that I'm going to kind of return to over and over again. So I just put this here because it made me laugh. So back to me again. I've been a software developer for 17 years, but those 17 years weren't consecutive. So in the middle of that, there was a gap, and during that gap, I retrained as a high school maths teacher. And it didn't go well at all. It was pretty much a disaster. I didn't have the senior leadership team on my side of the school that I was working for, and I was basically asked to leave. I was told that I was bad for the kids, bad for the school, that I was a complete disaster, and that I shouldn't be a teacher. And I did leave, and that was the end of that. But that had a big impact on me, you know, and I hadn't had that experience before. That was a big shock, to be asked to leave, to be told you are so bad at this that we want you to go. I wasn't actually sacked, but, you know, they made it very clear. I mean, they said, you shouldn't be here, we want you to go. So that was 6 years ago. Now I'm here. When I first joined ThoughtWorks, I was very quickly, within a few days, asked to take a tech lead role at Stockport Council. Now, I've never been a consultant before, and I've never actually been a tech lead before. I've never had that job title. I've had roles that involved leadership, but that's not been an official job title that I have had before. So it was a bit scary. I was kind of a bit scared and worried. But I like challenge. I do tend to like change. I tend to embrace change. And despite the pounding in the heart that says turn back, I did go ahead. I went for it. I said, yes, I was asked, you know, do you think you can do this? And I said, yeah, I think I can do that. I wasn't really sure. And actually, to be perfectly honest, which is what made me think of doing this talk, I was really quite overwhelmed, and I wasn't convinced that I could do it. And in the first few months, I think things kind of got worse rather than better in terms of my confidence. And I got to a point about 2 or 3 months in where I was, on Sunday evenings, I was dreading work on Monday mornings. And I was thinking, okay, this is not going well. But I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people. So I spoke to my colleagues in ThoughtWorks, I spoke to ex-colleagues, I spoke to friends, I spoke to people that I know in the tech community. And they were all telling me, you're doing fine, you're all right. You know, you don't actually have anything to worry about. But it somehow, that message wasn't getting in. I even got feedback from somebody who said that they found me slightly annoying because my confidence in myself didn't match what they were seeing. So the fact that I had such low self-esteem was actually a bit annoying because they could see that actually I was doing really well. And finally, all of those messages got in, and I realised that my fears were irrational. That actually the thing that I was scared of was not going to happen. But that was when I realised what was the thing that I was scared of. And the thing that I was scared of was that somebody was going to turn around to me and say, you're shit, fuck off. Which is what had happened to me before. When I was a teacher, that's what had happened. That was a real experience that I had had. So it didn't seem like an unreasonable thing to fear. But when I looked at it, I thought, actually, that's not a rational fear because this is a completely different situation. Apart from anything else, I've been doing this for 17 years. When I was a teacher, I'd been doing it for 2 terms. And it didn't work out. Whereas this is something that I'm actually really experienced in, and people keep telling me I'm good at it. And nobody is suggesting that they're about to sack me. So, you know, that fear that I have is not rational. And at that point, I said, right, okay, so it's not a rational fear, so I'm not going to have it anymore. I'm going to stop being scared of that thing that's not going to happen, because it's actually kind of spoiling my life. It's spoiling my working life. It's spoiling my experience, my daily experience. So I'm just going to stop doing that. So there you go, done. Your fears are irrational, stop, end of talk, we can all go home. Easy. But it's not the end of the talk. And the reason it's not the end of the talk is because fear is a really powerful thing. So this is a quote from a quote. This is just a small part of a longer quote, which I didn't put all on the screen because there's too much of it, but I am going to read it out to you. And this is by Anne Martel from the novel The Life of Pi, and he says this: I must say a word about fear. It is life's only true opponent. Only fear can defeat life. It is a clever, treacherous adversary, how well I know. It has no decency, respects no law or conventions, shows no mercy. It goes for your weakest spot, which it finds with unnerving ease. It begins in your mind, always. So you must fight hard to express it. You must fight hard to shine the light of words upon it. Because if you don't, if your fear becomes a wordless darkness that you avoid, perhaps even manage to forget, you open yourself to further attacks of fear because you never truly fought the opponent who defeated you. So stress, fear can be paralysing. We could be talking about just work stress. We could be talking, the most obvious example of it in the work context is imposter syndrome. And that's something that I've always suffered from. It's something that's very common amongst women, but men experience it too. It's a very common thing, particularly for consultants, in fact, for people who are kind of at the top of their game, for professionals who are expected to do a really good job. It's really, really common. And generally the way it manifests itself, and certainly from my point of view, is that you think that people are going to find you out. And I'm like most people, in fact, I'm not consistent. In some situations, I'm very confident, but I also have masses of insecurities. One of the things that I absolutely know that I can do is get a job. Always been good at that. I can persuade people to give me a job. Really good in interviews, really good at application forms, CV, covering letter, all the rest of it. I can persuade people to give me a job. But maybe that's the end of it. Maybe it's just that I'm good at persuading people to give me a job. It doesn't mean I can actually do these jobs that people keep giving me. And my worry has always been, and was particularly, it is a worry here and has been, that it's not going to take them long to work out that actually I can't do the things I told them I could do. And that actually my technical skills aren't quite up to scratch. I'm going to get found out. And then it's going to be your shit, fuck off. So that's really common, imposter syndrome, and that's one of the most obvious examples of when we feel fear in the workplace. And I think that most of the fear that we feel as consultants is around our ability to do a good job in whatever form. Now, I haven't had any anxiety attacks since I've been at ThoughtWorks. I actually haven't had any anxiety attacks for years. I think the last anxiety attack I had was when I was in labour with my second son, who's now 8 years old. So anxiety attacks are not something that I regularly suffer from anymore. But you can be anxious without having an anxiety attack. And the skills that I learned when I was suffering from anxiety, I still use them. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk about quite serious anxiety. Because apart from anything else, some people do have anxiety attacks. They're really common. If there isn't anybody in this room who is having or has had anxiety attacks, it's quite likely that there'll be somebody in this room who is supporting somebody who's dealing with anxiety. And there may well be people that you are working with or that are close to you that are suffering from anxiety attacks and you don't even know. It's really, really common. And so is depression. And anxiety and depression are actually very close in the way that they work and the way that they affect your brain. So I'm going to talk briefly about depression, but a lot of the principles that apply to anxiety also apply to depression. We've got Mental Health Awareness Week coming up. It's really useful to understand about anxiety and depression because they are taboo subjects. For a long time, I didn't tell my colleagues that I had ever suffered from anxiety because I thought that they might judge me. I thought they might think, oh, she's a bit flaky, or we can't rely on her, or she might not be able to do the job, she might not be able to handle things. So I didn't used to tell people that I'd suffered from anxiety attacks, but now I do because it's taboo and because people don't talk about it. And actually, there's a lot of help out there. And the more people talk about it, the more people who are suffering from it or supporting people who are suffering from it will get opportunities to find out and do something about it. So this is actually a blog post that I wrote a long time ago, but it's still up on the internet. That's the URL. And I'm going to talk a bit about what I have learned about anxiety. And so I'll talk a bit about my experience of it. So I suffered from generalised anxiety disorder, which means that everything made me anxious. There weren't any particular triggers, I just got anxious a lot, very, very easily. So I would have anxiety attacks just at the drop of a hat. They would just come out of nowhere. They would just hit me. And in my case, it was after a period of stress, after a period of several months of stress, which is really common. And once you understand the physiology of anxiety attacks, you can see why that would be, because all an anxiety attack is a rush of adrenaline into your system. Your body is just absolutely flooded with adrenaline. And in periods of stress, particularly prolonged periods of stress, so for me it was several months of stress, you use adrenaline to keep going. You're producing adrenaline on a daily basis. But at that point, everything's fine. It's maybe you're a bit stressed out, but you're coping, and the adrenaline's actually helping you to cope. And you're dealing with things day in, day out, day in, day out. But then the stress stops, and you think, oh, everything's going to be okay now. And it isn't. That's when people start suffering from anxiety attacks, actually when the stressful period is over. And the reason is that your body has got used to producing adrenaline at the drop of a hat, and now there's nowhere for it to go. So now it turns into anxiety attacks, which is exactly what happened to me. So what does an anxiety attack feel like? The adrenaline causes a lot of physical symptoms, and they vary in different people. So different people will experience different symptoms. There will be some that I haven't even listed here. So in my case, it was diarrhea, shaking, and nausea. But the nausea was the one that I really hated most of all. But people will experience these other symptoms as well, so headache, dizziness, chest pain, disturbed vision. There are other symptoms too. Another thing that used to happen to me in the midst of an attack was just this feeling of absolute dread and despair, just pure terror, as though I was in a horror film and the worst monster in the world was coming for me. Somebody was coming for me with an axe. It was pure terror in a way that I'd never experienced it before, but disembodied terror, terror with no object, just kind of abstract terror. And it felt external. So at first I thought, well, something is happening to me. Like, maybe I've taken some poison or something, or I've got cancer, or I'm just going mad, but something is happening to me. It's external to me. And it's horrible. It's really, really horrible. I'm going to get rid of this slide now because the slide's horrible. And I'm going to give you a nice slide instead, because there's hope. You can get over anxiety. There are lots and lots of things that you can do to cope with anxiety. And again, this is a quote from a quote. I didn't put all of it on the screen because there was too much of it, but I will read it out to you. So this is Toni Morrison, the novelist, and she says this: "For our sake and yours, forget your name in the street. Tell us what the world has been to you in the dark places and in the light. Don't tell us what to believe, what to fear. Show us belief's wide skirt and the stitch that unravels fear's core." And what I take from that is that it's giving you belief that you don't have to suffer from anxiety, that you can get over it, that actually that you can believe that you can get over it, and that in itself will cause you to get over it. And in my case, the thing that kind of saved me most of all, I suppose, was CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy. I was incredibly lucky that I had a partner who was working in a clinical psychology department. He was doing a PhD, so he had access to people, to resources, to a lot of documentation, literature that I could use to discover CBT. I couldn't get a therapist. This was 20 years ago. There are more of them around now, but I didn't actually have a therapist. I kind of did it on my own with the help of my partner. But these are the things that I learned. So the first thing that I learned was to understand the physiology and the psychology. So the physical thing is to understand that these experiences that I'm feeling, which, you know, I was really worried about. I thought I was dying. I thought something really horrible was happening to me. To know that it's just adrenaline, that all of those symptoms, all of those horrible physical symptoms are just adrenaline. And what's happening is that your mind has convinced your body that you are under threat, so your body is getting ready for fight or flight. And so that's why you get diarrhea and nausea, because your body is trying to just evacuate everything, so that none of your body's resources need to go on digesting food, so that everything can go towards fighting an enemy or fleeing. But if there is no enemy, then that's just unpleasantness for no good reason. But understanding that was key, and it wasn't just understanding the physiology, it was understanding the relationship between mind and body that makes that happen. So in my case, and again this is really common, what happened was I would constantly monitor myself, and I'd be thinking, am I having an anxiety attack? Am I having an anxiety attack? That question was causing the anxiety attacks. Because I was asking myself, am I having an anxiety attack? In that moment, I'm envisaging what it feels like to have an anxiety attack. I'm thinking, do I feel nauseous? And that, my body is interpreting as a threat. It's like, oh God, that nausea thing, we don't like that. Quick, let's do something about it. Let's make adrenaline. Uh-oh, that makes me feel nauseous. So actually, by asking myself, am I feeling anxious, I was making myself anxious. And the same applies to depression, that people who suffer from depression will be regularly asking themselves, do I feel depressed today? They make themselves feel depressed by asking themselves the question. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, which a very difficult pattern to break. But once you understand the pattern is there, then that's the first step. Understanding what is happening to you and why is really helpful. Another thing that was really helpful to me was to learn that adrenaline isn't dangerous. It feels awful, you know, shaking, nausea, all the rest of it. Chest pain, some people experience chest pain, that's terrifying. It's not actually dangerous. If you're suffering from a long-term heart conditioning and you are suffering from anxiety over a long period of time, it can have an impact, but otherwise, adrenaline is not dangerous. So you don't have to, because, you know, if you're in the midst of an anxiety attack, if you're also worrying, this thing is killing me, this is really bad for me, it's not going to help. So anyway, so you don't have to worry about that. Adrenaline is not bad for you, it serves a purpose. So knowing all of that, a really key skill is distracting yourself. So for me, doing puzzles, doing anything that involved a lot of brain power, doing something that I would have to focus on that would stop me from thinking about anxiety, stop me from focusing on the attack that I was having. Distraction is really useful. Finding somebody to talk to. So when I was in the midst of an attack, all I really wanted to do was curl up in a ball. I didn't want to communicate. I found it very hard to communicate when I was feeling anxious. But what I discovered was that actually the worst thing I could do was retreat inwards. I needed to try and externalise it. I needed to try and find somebody to talk to. And even if they didn't have anything useful to say, just having them there, describing to them what was happening to me, getting it out there, and also telling them what I knew about what I could do to try and address it. Just having somebody to talk to was really helpful. Being kind to yourself. So, you know, give yourself a bit of rope, it's all right, you know, just let yourself off a bit. And which also means acknowledging small progresses. So when I was starting to get better, I didn't think I was getting better. And it was because I had a partner who was able to say to me, you know, you are actually better than you were, having somebody who could point that out to me was really helpful, and being able to point it out to myself and acknowledge it. And also giving yourself time, because one of the problems that I had, which again is really common, is that once you understand what's happening, you know that an attack is being triggered by your own thoughts, which makes it your fault. There's nothing else that's causing this. It's your fault this is happening. It's not. But that's what I was thinking. It's my fault. I made this happen. And now that I understand how it's happening, I should be able to stop it. And if I can't, that just means I'm even more rubbish. You know, why can't I stop it? Why am I not getting better? And so that's about giving yourself time, because in fact what had happened to me and what happens to people who suffer frequently from anxiety is that their body has become conditioned to produce adrenaline at the drop of a hat. It's not something that they have instant conscious control over, and it takes time to learn the techniques to recondition your mind and your body to react in a different way to stimuli. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to give yourself time and not give yourself a hard time if it's not working instantly. So one of the ways in which you can recondition your body is to learn relaxation exercises. So what you can learn is to relax at the drop of a hat instead of produce adrenaline at the drop of a hat. And it's actually physically impossible to be completely relaxed and be having an anxiety attack. You can't have both at once. You can flip between them, but you can't have both at once. So if you can learn to relax all of your muscle groups, then what you're learning is how to stop an anxiety attack and prevent them from happening in the first place. So I now don't even think about it. So that there are various relaxation exercises you can do where you learn to relax all of the muscle groups in your body, and you do them one at a time. For me, the most obvious one is my shoulders, and it probably will be for most people. So when I feel myself tensing up, I physically drop your shoulders, and deep breaths, drop your shoulders. I've got up again, drop your shoulders. I've got up again, drop your shoulders. So, you know, just learning to relax is a really useful skill. And I now realise that I do it without even knowing I'm doing it. So, you know, actually several times a day I'll notice I'm going, breath, shoulders. And it's just, I just do it. It's become an instinct in me because I've trained myself to do that. One of the biggest ones of all, one of the most important ones, is to have arguments with yourself. So you will, I think I put them in the wrong order really. I'm in a minute going to talk about catastrophic thoughts, but you will be telling yourself, I feel anxious. You will be telling yourself, my life is over, something terrible is going to happen, everybody hates me, I'm going to get the sack. You will be telling yourself that there's something real to fear, and you have to have arguments with yourself. You have to say, actually, is that realistic? Is that really something that I need to fear? Is this really a thing that has to happen? Do I have to have an anxiety attack? No, I don't. It doesn't have to happen. I can stop it from happening. I'm having an anxiety attack. No, I'm not. I am, but I don't have to. I can make it stop. This can get better. And I just, you know, constant arguments with myself all the time, but less and less. I don't have to do that so much anymore. But when I was getting better, constantly, I was having arguments with myself. And I really like this quote: turn into the face of fear and tell it, you are not my master. You are the product of myself and I am your master. And that's what you're doing. You're learning to take control. So, catastrophic thoughts. What happens when you're suffering regularly from anxiety is that you will monitor yourself constantly, you will look for depression, you will look for anxiety, and you will therefore make it happen. You'll find it as a result of looking for it. And a part of that is that you will be having catastrophic thoughts. So in the midst of an attack, particularly for me, I'm dying, I'm going mad, my life is over, I'm never going to recover from this. But in the context of work, those catastrophic thoughts might not be quite as extreme, but we all have a tendency to have them. And what you have to do is think about what you would do if a friend came to you and said something like, nobody's ever going to love me again, everybody hates me, my life is over, I'm no good at anything. Those are catastrophic thoughts, and they're never true. So in the same way as you would argue with your friend when they came to you with their catastrophic thoughts, you have to argue with your own catastrophic thoughts, and you have to recognise them, label them, say that is a catastrophic thought and I'm not having it, I'm going to argue with it, I'm not going to just accept it, because fear is a liar. So one other really useful thing, particularly if you're in the midst of an attack, is to let it wash over you. Something that I always used to do if I was having an attack was I would tighten up. I would feel like I was fighting it. I need to fight it. I'm fighting it. And actually I wasn't fighting it. I was making it worse. I was perpetuating it because I was making myself more tense. And what I really needed to do was relax and let it wash over me. Now the problem, one of the reasons I didn't do that was when I relaxed, the nausea got worse, because initially there would be this kind of wave, and it's a bit like letting a wave wash over you. Initially it's big, and it does completely take you over, but then it goes away. If you fight it, it doesn't go away, it stays. You just keep getting more and more. If you let it go, then it does go. And a part of that for me is recognising that the experience of adrenaline is actually the same experience, whether it's fear or excitement. That feeling of having these waves of anxiety could also be described as rushes. This is actually the same experience that you have when you're excited. And if you can repackage it and say, sometimes this is a pleasurable experience. This isn't, sometimes I have this same experience and I see it in a completely different light. So letting it wash over you and thinking this doesn't have to be negative, it's just an anxiety attack and it will end. So this is the list of all the things that I've said. Understand the physiology and the psychology, understand what's happening to you. Adrenaline isn't dangerous. And what I'm going to do now, I was going to ask people to do an exercise, but I'm not going to have time. How am I doing for time, Asvini? How long have I got? Do you know?
20 minutes.
Brilliant, okay. I might do the exercise at the end if we have time, but I think probably I haven't got time because I do want to have time for a bit of questions and discussion. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through this list in the context of me being scared when I first started at ThoughtWorks. Because I was scared, I was anxious, I wasn't suffering from anxiety attacks, but I was anxious and it was having a negative impact on my life. So understanding what was happening to me was absolutely key. Recognising which thoughts were triggering these feelings, labelling them as irrational, recognising that I didn't actually have to fear the things that I thought I had to fear. Distracting myself. So what I came to recognise was that I was kind of obsessing. I was thinking that it's all going horribly wrong, I'm no good at it, I can't do it, I'm going to get found out. Once I'd recognised that those fears were not rational, but they were still coming, so then I had to distract myself. When I started having those thoughts, I would argue against them and then I would think about something else. So there was a piece of code that I was involved in that had these really complicated algorithms. I'd think about those, I'd try and work those out. I'd distract myself from the negative thoughts. Having somebody to talk to, one of the reasons that I love ThoughtWorks is that there are so many people to talk to, and it's not just that I can approach my colleagues and ask them to talk to me, they approach me, you know, particularly in my first few days at Stockport. People were constantly dragging me off for coffee and saying, how are you doing, and asking me how I was, and you know, giving me positive feedback and telling me that I was doing all right, you know, trying to argue against all the negative thoughts that were coming out. Be kind to yourself. So again, you know, getting myself to pay attention to the positive feedback and believe it and repeat it to myself. Relaxation exercises, as I said, you know, dropping my shoulders and breathing. I was doing that more consciously when I realised that actually I was kind of, things weren't going that great. Having arguments with myself, telling myself these fears are not realistic. You don't actually have anything to fear. You're doing all right. Everything's fine. And avoiding self-monitoring. So one of the things that I realised was that I was actually, when I was dreading work on a Monday morning, it wasn't so much anymore that I was worried about not doing a good job. I was worried about feeling anxious. I was thinking, I don't want to go to work today because when I get there and on the way there, I'm not going to feel good. I'm going to feel anxious and fearful. And then I was looking for it. I was thinking, oh, it's Monday morning. How do I feel? Oh, I feel rubbish again. So the same thing again. I'm making it happen by expecting it to happen. Recognising catastrophic thoughts. I've talked about that you know, that they weren't rational thoughts. And giving myself time to actually get over it. It's really interesting actually. Once I identified what was happening, I got things improved really fast. But then I have that experience of kind of being there before. Things don't always work that quickly. And this thing about allowing attacks to wash over you. I think the relevance for me here is that I remembered how I felt when I got the job at ThoughtWorks. I was really, really excited. I was amazed that I got the job. But I was really, really excited, and I thought, I need to get that feeling back again. So this feeling of fear can be turned back into that feeling of excitement, which is something that I did actually manage to do. So I'm just going to skip past that. Oh, I quite like that. So that's kind of repackaging it. Scared of heights is not a height, it's a depth. And I want to talk a bit about self-fulfilling prophecies, because as human beings we're all very suggestible, some to more extent than others, but we're all suggestible. And that thing of asking yourself if you're having an anxiety attack and creating one as a result, or just getting up in the morning and thinking, oh, I'm going to feel anxious again today, or I'm going to feel depressed again today. Just by thinking it, you make it happen. We're very suggestible. So self-fulfilling prophecies are a very real thing. We can make things happen. And it's not magic, it's not woo, it's just that we listen to ourselves and we believe the things we tell ourselves. We have to tell ourselves different things. But the great thing about self-fulfilling prophecies is that it works for the positive as well as the negative. So if you tell yourself, I'm going to have a great day today, I'm going to do brilliantly, you know, people think I'm really great, you know, it's going to go well. You can actually make a difference. So you can make self-fulfilling prophecies work for you instead of against you. And one of the things that fits in there is the fake it till you make it. You know, if you don't feel confident, but you act confident, if you don't feel happy but you fake a smile, very quickly that smile becomes real. There's some really interesting therapy you can do where you do laughter. Everybody in the room is made to laugh out loud, and it feels horrible at first. It's very false, not real. It sounds false. But if you keep doing it, very quickly turns into real laughter, because it is actually quite funny. But the same goes for smiling. If you force a smile, it very quickly becomes a real smile. And if you fake confidence, people see confidence in you, they respect it, they think, oh, she's pretty good. You get their positive feedback, you very quickly actually become really confident. And one of the other things that I want to say, again, this is a quote within a quote, so I'm going to read the whole thing. So what she says is, always do the things you fear most. Courage is an acquired taste like caviar. Trust all joy. If the evil eye fixes you in its gaze, look elsewhere. Get ready to be 87. And that's my favourite bit. What she's saying is, look, you're headed for old age. Get ready for a brave old age. Get ready to be loud and brave and bold and annoying and whatever. But, you know, if you can face your fears now and be bold now, you will carry that all the way through. So there was a brilliant webinar that was broadcast a couple of weeks ago. It was a ThoughtWorks We Are Technologists thing. I encourage you to look it up. There were various emails around it. If you just Google We Are Technologists ThoughtWorks, you get to a web page where you can get to the webinar, the recording. It was Rebecca Parsons, who's our CTO, and a woman called Dr. Susan Davis-Alley from the Anita Borg Institute. And she gave a really useful piece of advice, which is what I said before about acting confident. If you act confident, you will become confident. And it was particularly aimed at women, but it works for men too, that women in particular tend to be very hesitant in their language, so they tend to say, I think, I believe, or I feel about their opinions. So they're kind of tempering it. They're being a bit hesitant, they're not entirely confident. So that's just one thing you can do, is look out for those phrases in your own speech and replace them with, in my experience. When you say in my experience, you give yourself an authority, and other people will have more respect for you. And it's not always that easy to do in verbal communication, because you forget and you say things without noticing you're saying it. But what you can do is review any written communication. So when you're sending emails, when you're sending text, look out for hesitant language. Replace it with positive, confident language. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. I quite like this. This is funny because he's saying there's nothing to fear but fear itself, and there's this giant dog who's going to eat him whole. And of course there are real things that genuinely are threats. There are real things to be afraid of. But what I noticed when I was suffering from anxiety is it was fear that I feared. Fear was the thing that I was terrified of, because it was the anxiety attacks themselves that I was terrified of. So there wasn't even a concrete thing, it was just the anxiety attacks. They themselves became the object of my fear and therefore created themselves as a result. And I'm not going to read you that poem, I am going to read you, I'm not going to read you because that's it. There's only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve, fear of failure. When I was, I've had a couple of novels published, I'm a writer, and it took me 4 years each to write each novel, and part of the reason for that was because I used to frequently get writer's block. I would sit down to write and nothing would come out. And it was always the fear of failure that was paralysing me. I was worried that I would write something rubbish, that nobody would want to read, that nobody would want to publish, that I would get criticised for. And the only way I could ever get a first draft out was to just banish the inner critic, banish the fear of failure. It doesn't matter if it's rubbish, it can be rubbish, and then you edit it and make it better. So fear of failure is really paralysing. It does prevent you from moving forwards. And everything you ever wanted is on the other side of fear. I like this one. This is another quote. So the thing is that, okay, so what if you say, right, I'm all right, I'm brilliant, I'm fantastic. Well, if you're British, that's just boasting, isn't it? You know, I mean, you're not allowed to tell people that. You're not allowed to go around saying that kind of thing. And I find that quite difficult because as soon as my confidence comes back, I just think, yeah, but you're just really big-headed now, and that's really horrible. So here's a really nice quote about that. So again, this is a quote within a quote. It goes like this. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory that is within us. It is not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And the very last thing I'm going to do is read you out this poem, which I found when I was Googling fear. It's very short. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, let my country awake. So that's the end of the talk. Are there any